It was a humid April afternoon when I first saw her again. The streets of Trastevere buzzed with tourists and locals alike, basking in the sun that cast a golden hue over the ancient cobblestones. I was carrying a paper bag of fresh cannoli from a nearby bakery. On my way back to the small art studio I ran near Piazza Santa Maria. And there she was, Bianca, leaning against the fountain like a scene from a film, sunglasses perched atop her head, tapping away at her phone as if she were directing a runway show. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. Not since university. Back then, she was bright, dramatic, and always spinning tales that were a little too vivid to be real. But I had believed most of them. Until the day she vanished without a word. She spotted me and gasped, arms wide open. "Alessia. Dio mio, look at you. Still an artist, I hope." Her voice hadn't changed, sweet and smooth, tinged with theatrical wonder. I was hesitant at first, but nostalgia softened my guard. We sat at a cafe nearby, catching up. Or more accurately, I listened while Bianca painted her new life in broad, glittering strokes. She now worked as an interior designer for luxury villas in Capri. Her boyfriend was a famous singer. She split her time between Rome, Milan, and Paris. Her life sounded like a glossy magazine spread. A bit too glossy. "I've been meaning to reach out," she said, sipping an overpriced iced espresso. "You won't believe the people I'm working with. You must come to this gala on Friday. It's at Villa Aurelia. All the designers and curators will be there." Villa Aurelia. That was not a place you casually rented for a party. But Bianca spoke with such certainty, such flair, I found myself nodding. As I walked home past the Tiber, something inside me itched with doubt. Bianca had always had an unusual relationship with reality. I had convinced myself it was harmless before. But something about her this time felt exaggerated, inflated. And yet I was curious. Deeply, irrationally curious. So I said I would come. And that was the beginning of everything. Friday evening arrived with an unexpected chill in the air, as if Rome itself was holding its breath. I wore my best black dress, the one I saved for gallery openings, and stood nervously outside the gates of Villa Aurelia. The building loomed behind wrought iron gates, majestic and utterly silent. There was no red carpet. No line of taxis. No echoes of music or chatter. Just stillness. I checked the time. Bianca had told me to arrive at 8. It was 10 past. I hesitated, then rang the bell at the side entrance. A man in a suit appeared, frowning. "There is no event scheduled tonight," he said flatly, before closing the small window. I blinked, heart thudding. Had I misunderstood? Just then, I received a voice message from Bianca. "Oh, Cara, I'm so sorry. They changed the venue last minute. It's now at a private loft near Campo da Fiore. I'll send you the address." She sounded breathless, as if in the middle of a whirlwind. I sighed, flagged a taxi, and gave the driver the new location. 20 minutes later, I arrived at a building tucked between 2 wine bars. It was dimly lit, the stairs narrow and steep. I climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked. Bianca flung the door open with dramatic flair, wearing a sequined dress and a wide grin. "There you are. Come in, come in. Everyone's here already." Everyone? The loft was cluttered. A few people lounged on beanbags. A man was asleep on the sofa. A woman in sunglasses indoors was scrolling through her phone. The music playing from an old speaker crackled between songs. It was not a gala. It was a poorly organized house party. Bianca poured me a glass of Prosecco, talking excitedly about a new gallery she claimed to be opening in Milan. I nodded politely, still trying to understand what was going on. None of the guests seemed remotely connected to the art world. One of them asked me if I could fix their printer. As the night dragged on, Bianca introduced me to a man she called Lorenzo, the director of the Rome Contemporary Museum. He turned out to be her cousin, who drove a delivery van. Later, I stood on the small balcony, looking out over the rooftops of Rome, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and unease. Was she lying? Or did she genuinely believe all of this? I couldn't tell. But I knew this was just the beginning. The next few weeks unfolded like a dream built on shifting sand. Bianca and I met often. She insisted on dragging me to coffee dates at overpriced bistros, constantly surrounded by people she called clients, stylists, and collectors. But none of them ever spoke about design or art. Most conversations revolved around gossip, wild plans, or vague business ideas. I began noticing patterns. Bianca always paid in cash. She never let anyone see her phone screen. She name-dropped famous people, but never provided proof. When I asked about her boyfriend, the singer, she waved it off with a coy smile and said, "Oh, he's touring in Ibiza. You know how artists are." At first, I wanted to believe she was just eccentric. Rome attracts dreamers and performers after all. But there was something deeper, something off. Her stories began to conflict. One day, she told me she had a meeting with the curator at the Maxi Museum. The next day, she said the meeting was in Milan. When I asked for details, she changed the subject. Then came the afternoon I visited her studio. It was supposed to be a showroom in the heart of Monte. Instead, she led me into a crumbling building above a hair salon. The flat was empty except for a cracked mirror, a roll of canvas, and a few candles. She lit one, looked at me with wild eyes, and said, "This is where I create energy. You can't design luxury unless you understand the spirit of space." I stood in silence, the scent of melting wax filling the air. Something wasn't right. Later that week, a friend of mine from art school, Matteo, happened to see a photo of Bianca on my phone. "That's Bianca De Luca?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Didn't she get kicked out of her last job for pretending to be a curator?" I stared at him. What? She made up a whole persona. Claimed she worked for Galleria Borghese. Even printed fake business cards. It was bizarre. The puzzle pieces began falling into place. Bianca wasn't living a lie to deceive others. She was living in it, breathing it. Her world was a house of mirrors, each reflection feeding the next, until she no longer knew where truth ended and fantasy began. And I was being pulled into it. Things escalated quickly after Matteo's revelation. I could no longer look at Bianca without searching her words for the seams, places where the truth had been stitched to fantasy. One evening, she invited me to what she called an exclusive industry preview for a fashion collaboration. I arrived at a crumbling palazzo near Trastevere. The marble steps were worn smooth, the door opened by a boy no older than 15. He didn't speak, just led me through corridors lined with mismatched chairs and chipped sculptures. Inside the main room, it was clear there was no event. A few people stood around awkwardly, smoking by the windows. Bianca arrived late, carrying 2 pizza boxes and announcing with glee, "Change of plans. We're doing something more intimate tonight." She acted as if nothing was amiss, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she poured wine. She clung to conversations, laughed too loudly, and corrected anyone who questioned her. At one point, she pulled me aside and said, "You trust me, don't you? I know what I'm doing. The people here, they just don't see it yet." She looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for reassurance. I nodded slowly. "Of course, I trust you." But in truth, I didn't. I felt something cracking, not just in her illusion, but in her mind. She was clinging to a version of herself that no longer existed, if it ever did at all. A few days later, I decided to do some research of my own. I searched every mention of Bianca De Luca in online archives, magazines, art blogs. Her name popped up sporadically in photo captions, mostly unverified. One old event flyer listed her as a creative consultant, but the gallery she supposedly represented had shut down years ago. Then I found something chilling. A discussion thread on an obscure Italian design forum. The title was "Beware, Bianca De Luca and the Identity Trap." Multiple users recounted the same pattern, Bianca appearing in their circles, claiming success, creating excitement, then vanishing after a few weeks. One even claimed she'd used their name to secure a short-term flat, which she left without paying. I read through the comments, my stomach tightening. I wasn't special. I wasn't the first. I was just the latest chapter in her fiction. And the worst part? I had introduced her to people I cared about. I stopped answering Bianca's calls. At first, it was easy to pretend I was busy. Rome offered plenty of excuses: design meetings, deadlines, exhibitions. But she noticed the silence. Her messages became more frequent and their tone changed. "Where are you? You said we were a team. Don't let them turn you against me." One evening, she showed up at my flat uninvited. She was wearing a long red coat, the hem slightly frayed, and her lipstick smeared as if she had rushed to put it on. She held a bundle of papers, sketches, business cards, and handwritten notes. "I need you to help me," she said. "They're trying to erase me. I have proof."
"Look."
She spread the pages on my coffee table like a crime scene. "See this?" She pointed at a blurry photograph. "This was the night I signed with the gallery in Florence. They're lying if they say I wasn't there." I looked down. The photo was grainy and dark. It could have been taken at any dinner party in the city. "I need people to believe in me," she whispered. "You believe in me, don't you, Nora?" I didn't know what to say. I offered her tea, trying to steady my own hands, and told her gently, "Maybe you need to rest. Take a step back. All of this, it's too much." Her face froze. Then she laughed. Not softly, but a deep, bitter laugh that echoed in my small kitchen. "You think I'm crazy," she said. "Just like the rest of them." She stood, gathered her papers in one swift motion, and stormed out. For a moment, I just stood there, heart pounding. I realized how far she had fallen. Or maybe, how far she had always been. A few nights later, I met with Lucia, one of my mentors. I told her everything. Lucia sipped her espresso and said calmly, "These people exist, Nora. They survive through illusion. But don't let them live in your head. Step back before you're written into their story for good." It was good advice, but part of me still ached. Because despite everything, I knew Bianca wasn't just trying to deceive others. She was desperately trying to convince herself. Bianca no longer tried to contact me. Her silence was louder than her words ever were. At first, I felt relief, then guilt, and eventually dread. I started hearing whispers from others in our circle. Apparently, Bianca had resurfaced with a new story, a new project. This time, she claimed to be curating a private art collection for an Italian countess. Some believed her. Others rolled their eyes. But no one stopped her. What unsettled me most was that she was drawing in new people, young interns, aspiring artists, people with open hearts and fragile egos. I remembered being like them once. One afternoon, I bumped into Matteo again. We were both in line at a small cafe near Piazza Navona. He looked tired, older somehow. "She hasn't stopped," he said, before I even brought up her name. "Last week she asked me to introduce her to someone at the Venice Biennale. I told her no. She smiled and said she'd do it without me." He stirred his coffee slowly. "She doesn't just lie, Nora. She believes it. That's the danger." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, Bianca's words echoing in my head. Her charm had always been just enough to pull people in, but just shallow enough to keep them chasing something that wasn't real. And now she was doing it again, to someone else. I decided to warn one of the interns I'd seen with her, a shy girl named Carlotta. I sent her a polite message, suggesting caution without accusations. A few days later, Carlotta replied curtly, "Bianca has been nothing but kind to me. Maybe you're just bitter." I stared at the message, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Bianca had already rewritten her story. I had become the villain, the jealous colleague, the bitter friend who could not keep up. And the worst part? She was good at it. Rome's art season was in full swing. Invitations filled my inbox, gallery openings, private previews, rooftop mixers. I had work to do and contacts to maintain, so I dressed the part and showed up, trying to push Bianca from my mind. Until I walked into the Galleria Livia and saw her face staring back at me. A portrait right at the entrance. It was abstract, but unmistakably her. Those stormy eyes, that defiant tilt of the chin. The placard underneath read, La Visionaria, a tribute to Bianca Mariani. My stomach turned. Bianca wasn't even supposed to be in the show. I spotted the curator, Dario, and pulled him aside. I thought she wasn't involved, I said. Dario raised an eyebrow.
She isn't.
That piece was submitted anonymously. The artist claimed it was inspired by a myth, a muse who once ruled the Roman scene. I didn't have to guess who had written that. Bianca had inserted herself into the narrative again. Not directly, but through influence, through image, through myth. And it was working. People gathered around the piece, sipping Prosecco, murmuring as if they were in the presence of something divine. Some even took selfies beside it. It made me feel sick. Later that evening, I caught a glimpse of her in the courtyard. She stood alone beneath the fairy lights, wearing a silk dress and that same confident smile. It was as if she were watching her own legend take root. Our eyes met across the distance. She didn't flinch, just smiled wider. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She no longer needed to be present to control the room. The portrait went viral. Photos of La Visionaria were everywhere, magazines, blogs, art forums. Suddenly, Bianca was a name again. Only this time, no one questioned her. The mystery gave her power. The myth had taken a life of its own. I kept my distance, watching as the city bent around her image like vines around a statue. She didn't chase legitimacy anymore. She had replaced it with allure. One day, I received a call from a small gallery in Trastevere. They were seeking submissions for a collaborative installation, and my name had been suggested. I hesitated. The idea of working again in the same circles as Bianca made my skin crawl. But I needed to reclaim something for myself. I submitted a piece. Raw, personal. It reflected the twisted nature of perception and truth. I called it Mirrors Lie Differently. To my surprise, it was accepted. The opening night was small but elegant. My piece stood in a quiet corner, bathed in soft light. People came and went, some nodding, some staying longer, reading the artist's note. I thought it would be a calm night, until I turned and saw Bianca standing behind me. I liked your piece, she said softly, but you always did prefer truth over beauty. There was no venom in her voice, just detachment. You came to provoke me? I asked. She smiled faintly.
No, Nora.
I came to see if you finally understood. None of it is real. Not the praise. Not the rejection. Not even the truth. Her words hung in the air like smoke. You built a world around yourself, I replied. But what happens when no one else wants to live in it? She tilted her head. That's the difference between you and me, she said. I don't need anyone to stay. I just need them to look. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the gallery's shadows, as if she had never been there. After that night, something shifted. Not in Bianca, she remained as ethereal and composed as ever, but in the way people started talking about her. The spell began to crack. There were murmurs at galleries, comments in the margins of articles. One artist claimed she had taken credit for a joint project. Another mentioned missing funds. No one said it loudly, but the pattern was forming. Then came the exhibit cancellation. A prestigious showcase in Florence removed her name quietly from its press release. No explanation, no apology, just silence where her name had once glowed. Bianca, of course, acted unfazed. On her social media, she posted moody photos of Roman rooftops and poetic captions about seasons of transformation. But those of us who knew her knew the signs. She was spiraling, quietly, elegantly. And this time, no one rushed to catch her. One evening, I found myself walking past her old flat near Campo de' Fiori. The lights were off. The shutters closed. A dusty letterbox stuffed with flyers. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like watching the final flicker of a candle. Later that week, I heard from Matteo. He had run into Bianca in a bookshop. She was buying a stack of psychology books. Said she was working on a memoir. She said it's going to be the definitive truth, Matteo added, half laughing. Her version of everything. I didn't reply. What was there left to say? Bianca would always live in her own story. But now, fewer people were willing to play a role in it. Spring arrived in Rome quietly that year. The cobbled streets warmed under golden sun, and tourists returned to the piazzas like waves to the shore. Life moved on, as it always does. I had an exhibit opening at a contemporary space near the Tiber. It was modest, personal, curated with care. No grandeur. No mystique. Just honesty. As I stood near the entrance, greeting guests and sipping Prosecco, I noticed a figure slip in through the back. She didn't speak to anyone. Didn't touch the wine. Just wandered the room, eyes scanning each piece like they were maps from a forgotten time. Bianca. I watched her walk slowly toward the centerpiece, a large canvas titled The Absence. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever created. A piece about letting go. About finally seeing yourself, without reflection, without distortion. She stopped in front of it, stared for a long time, and then, to my surprise, sat on the bench across from it. People moved around her like currents around a stone. She didn't flinch, and neither did I. When the night ended and the guests had gone, I turned to see if she was still there. She wasn't. Just a single folded note left on the bench. You were right. Looking is enough. No need to be seen. That was the last time I ever heard from her. I never replied. The story of Bianca Mariani didn't end in flames or glory. It faded like smoke in Roman twilight. Beautiful, dangerous, unforgettable, but never quite real.